the smell of onions browning in bacon grease on a Wednesday evening, the clatter of a cast iron lid being set down on the counter. For millions of black families across the South and through the Great Migration Trail north, that sound was dinner being handled. Not fancy, not photographed, just handled. These are the recipes that never made it into the mainstream cookbooks, the ones that got passed across kitchen counters, not through culinary schools. Number 17 on this list turned a 5-cent ingredient into something specialty markets now charge $15 for. Number 8 is the dish North Carolina families still argue about at reunions. And number 7 started in a temple and ended up at every family gathering on the south side of Chicago. The American food industry spent decades pretending these recipes did not exist, even while borrowing from every single one of them. Hit subscribe because these are the recipes that built the culture. Here are 25 African American recipes you will wish you knew sooner. Number 25, Chow, relish. Every fall, black grandmothers across the Carolinas and Appalachia pulled out the canning jars and started chopping. Chow was a pickled relish made from the last vegetables of the season: green tomatoes, cabbage, onions, and peppers, all chopped fine and cooked down in vinegar with mustard seed, celery seed, and turmeric. The recipe changed from kitchen to kitchen because the whole point was using whatever the garden still had. One household made it sweeter, another made it so hot it cleared the sinuses. It went on top of pinto beans, beside black-eyed peas, and next to any piece of pork that touched a plate. A single batch could fill dozens of jars, and those jars traveled. They showed up at church, at neighbors' doors, and in the bags of grown children heading back to the city after a visit. The giving was the tradition as much as the making. Most families stopped growing their own gardens by the 1990s, and without the garden, there was nothing left over to pickle. Chow did not fade because people lost the recipe. It faded because they lost the rose. Number 24, chicken bog. This is a low-country South Carolina dish that black families along the PD River region made their own. Rice, chicken, smoked sausage, all cooked in one pot until the rice absorbed every drop of broth and went thick and sticky. The name comes from the texture. The rice bogs down. It was a church supper staple, cheap enough to feed 40 people from one pot. Families seasoned it differently depending on the county. Some added a splash of hot sauce at the end. Others kept it plain and let the smoked meat do the talking. Chicken bog never left the region, which is exactly why most of the country has never heard of it. The families who make it are not interested in sharing it with a food magazine. They are interested in making sure there's enough for seconds. Number 23, Sawmill gravy. White gravy made from pan drippings, flour, and milk, poured over biscuits and eaten for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, depending on how tight the week was. The name came from the lumber camps where workers ate it because it was cheap and filling. In black households across the rural South, sawmill gravy stretched a small amount of sausage or salt pork into a meal for an entire table. The technique was simple but unforgiving. Too much flour and it turned to paste. Not enough fat and it stuck to the skillet. The cook had to stand there stirring the whole time, adjusting the milk by feel until the consistency was right. Nobody wrote that part down. By the time younger generations asked how to make it, the women who knew the feel of it were already gone. Number 22, watermelon rind pickles. After the red flesh was eaten, the thick white rind got peeled, cubed, and soaked overnight in salted water. The next day, it was simmered in a syrup of vinegar, sugar, cinnamon sticks, and whole cloves until the pieces turned translucent and tender. Black families across the Deep South made these every summer because throwing away the rind was unthinkable when it could become something worth putting on the table. The jars sat in the pantry alongside the other preserves, and they came out at holiday meals as a side dish that confused anyone who had never seen one. Sweet, tangy, spice, and unmistakably watermelon, but nothing like eating a slice in the yard. The preparation took the better part of a day, which meant it was usually a Saturday project. Grandmothers taught it by handing a child a peeler and pointing at the pile. Number 21, sweet potato butter roll. Not a roll made with butter. A sheet of biscuit dough spread with mashed sweet potato, brown sugar, cinnamon, and a generous amount of butter, then rolled tight like a jelly roll, sliced and baked in a pan with a syrup pooling around the edges. Black families in Virginia, the Carolinas, and Tennessee made these for church bake sales and holiday tables. The syrup caramelized during baking and turned the bottom edges crisp. Most modern sweet potato recipes lean toward casseroles with marshmallows on top. The butter roll was the original, and it did not need a single marshmallow. The women who made it measured nothing. They knew the dough by feel, the filling by taste, and the oven by sound. That confidence came from making it dozens of times, and it could not be replaced by a recipe card. Here is something worth saying out loud. Every recipe on this list came from kitchens that operated on a budget most Americans today would not recognize. $1.50 fed a family of 6. Not because the food was cheap in the way fast food is cheap. It was cheap because the cook knew things. She knew which cuts the butcher would practically give away. She knew what grew in the yard without planting. She knew how to stretch one protein across 3 meals without anyone feeling shorted. That knowledge was not written down. It moved mouth to ear, hand to hand, and when the person who held it passed, the recipe often went with them. That is the real cost of what was lost. Number 20, fried squash, yellow crookneck squash, sliced thin, dredged in cornmeal, and fried in a cast iron skillet until the edges turned golden and the center stayed soft. This was a summer garden staple in Black households across the Deep South. Every family grew squash because it produced more than anyone could eat. Frying it in cornmeal was the fastest way to serve it, and children who refused boiled vegetables would eat fried squash without complaint. A little salt, maybe a dusting of black pepper, and it came out of the pan onto a plate lined with a paper bag to catch the grease. Simple. It did not pretend to be anything other than what it was. A garden vegetable, fried right, eaten hot, gone from most tables by the time frozen vegetables took over, but still alive in the kitchens that never trusted a freezer more than a garden. Number 19, Potlikker. The liquid left in the pot after greens, turnips, collards, or cabbage had been boiled down with a smoked ham hock or a piece of salt pork. Most people outside the tradition threw this away. In Black Southern kitchens, it was the prize. Potlikker was served in a cup or a bowl, sometimes alongside the greens, sometimes on its own the next morning as a broth. It was salty, smoky, faintly bitter from the greens, and dense with the minerals and vitamins that had cooked out of the vegetables over hours of simmering. Older generations believed it could settle a stomach, break a fever, and bring a sick person back to strength. Whether that was true in a medical sense did not matter. What mattered was that someone brought you a warm cup of it when you were unwell, and you drank it because the person who made it told you to. That act, the standing over the stove, the ladling, the carrying it to the bedside, was the medicine. The greens themselves were the main event at dinner, but the potlikker was what people fought over quietly in the kitchen before the table was set. Some soaked cornbread in it, others drank it straight, A few poured it over rice. There was no single right way because every family had already decided the right way a generation earlier and did not revisit the question. When collard greens moved from a slow all-day pot to a quick saute in olive oil, the potlikker vanished with the method. The modern version of the dish is lighter, greener, and faster. It is also missing the thing that made Black families cook greens for 4 hours in the first place. They were never just cooking the greens. They were making the broth. Number 18, vinegar pie. This one surprises people. A pie made with vinegar, sugar, eggs, butter, and a little flour, baked in a single crust. Tastes like a cross between chess pie and lemon meringue, tangy and sweet with the custard center. Black families in Appalachia and the Upper South made vinegar pie when lemons were unavailable or too expensive, which for most of the year in rural areas they were. The acidity of the vinegar did the same work a lemon would, and the result was honest and good. It cost almost nothing. A bottle of vinegar lasted months. This is not a novelty. It is a solution born from knowing how flavor actually works. Number 17, sassafras tea. The roots of the sassafras tree grew wild across the South, and Black families dug them up, scrubbed the bark clean, and boiled pieces of it in water until the liquid turned a reddish brown with a smell like root beer. Because sassafras is where root beer originally came from. The tea was served hot in winter and cold in summer, sweetened with sugar or honey. Children drank it, adults drank it. It was free and it grew everywhere, along roadsides, at the edge of woods, in the strip of land between the yard and the field. Gathering the roots was a chore that fell to whoever had the time, and cleaning them was slow work, but the tea itself required nothing more than water and heat. It tasted like something between birch and vanilla, earthy and sweet at once. Number 16, fried okra, sliced into rounds, tossed in seasoned cornmeal, and fried in a cast iron skillet with enough oil to come halfway up the pieces. The outside turned golden and crunchy, while the inside stayed tender without the sliminess that made boiled okra divisive. Black families across every corner of the South fried okra from June through September when the pods were small and fresh from the garden. The key was cutting them thick enough to hold their shape and getting the oil hot enough that the cornmeal sealed immediately. Too cool and the coating fell off. Too thin and they burned before the okra cooked through. A good batch disappeared from the plate before dinner was served, picked at by every hand that passed through the kitchen. It was a side dish in theory and a snack in practice, and nobody ever made enough. Number 15, pear preserves. Not the soft pears from the supermarket, the small, hard, sandy pears that grew in nearly every Black family's yard across the rural South. They were called sand pears or kefir pears, and eating them raw was a chore, but cooked down with sugar and a little lemon juice, they turned translucent and amber and held their shape in the jar. Pear preserves went on biscuits, on pancakes, on a spoon, straight from the jar. Canning day was an all-day affair, usually led by the oldest woman in the house, and the jars lined the pantry shelf like currency. When the pear trees were cut down to make room for new construction, the preserves disappeared too. Here is the uncomfortable truth the grocery industry does not advertise. African American cooking was never a cuisine of limitation. It was a cuisine of intelligence. The recipes on this list did not come from people who lacked options and stumbled into flavor by accident. They came from cooks who understood fat, acid, salt, smoke, and time at a level that formal culinary training now charges thousands of dollars to teach. The French mother sauces get a semester. Black grandmothers learn roux by standing next to the stove at age 9, stirring until the flour turned the right shade of brown and getting popped on the hand if they stopped too soon. That transfer of knowledge was more rigorous than most people understand. It produced cooks who could walk into a kitchen with almost nothing and walk out with something people still talk about decades later. The erasure was never about the quality of the food. It was about who made it. And until that fact is said plainly, no amount of celebrity chef, tributes, or soul food revival festivals will fix what was broken. The knowledge was stolen first, then it was repackaged, then the original cooks were forgotten. That sequence is not an accident. It is a pattern, and it has been running for over 100 years. Number 14, brown sugar baked ham. A whole ham, scored in diamond crosshatch, studded with cloves, coated in a paste of brown sugar and mustard, and baked low and slow until the glaze turned dark and crackled at the edges. In Black households, this was the Christmas ham, the Easter ham, the funeral ham. The same recipe, the same pan, the same oven, year after year. The glaze recipe was personal. Some families used Coca-Cola, others used pineapple juice. A few swore by Dr. Pepper. The constants were brown sugar, dry mustard, and thyme. The smell filled every room in the house hours before the ham was ready, and neighbors knew what was happening without being told. A baked ham anchored a table in a way nothing else could. It sat in the center already sliced part way, and people helped themselves. No one served it. It was communal by design. At funerals, the ham arrived before the family finished crying. Someone always brought one. It did not need to be asked for. The leftovers went into ham salad, ham and bean soup, ham sandwiches on white bread with mustard, and finally the bone went into a pot of greens or beans. A single ham could feed a family for a week and a half. The economics were part of the tradition, but so was the ceremony, the scoring, the studding, the basting, the waiting. When pre-sliced deli ham became the norm in the 1990s, the whole baked ham started disappearing from tables. Younger cooks saw it as too much work. What they did not see was that the work was the point. The work was how love looked when it could not say the words. A scored ham in the oven on Christmas Eve said everything a family needed to hear. Number 13, fried eggplant. Sliced in rounds, salted and left to sweat on a towel, then dredged in seasoned cornmeal and fried in a skillet. Black families in Louisiana and the Gulf Coast grew eggplant in their gardens and treated it the same way they treated squash and green tomatoes: cornmeal, hot oil, cast iron. The salt drew out the bitterness. The cornmeal gave it crunch. Served alongside rice and gravy, it stretched a meal without anyone noticing the protein was thin that week. Eggplant was never glamorous in the rural South. It was reliable, and reliability was worth more than glamour when mouths needed feeding. Number 12, tomato pie, a deep dish, pie crust filled with thick slices of ripe summer tomato, layered with salt, pepper, fresh basil, if the garden had it, and topped with a mixture of mayonnaise and sharp cheddar cheese, then baked until the top bubbled and browned. Black families in Virginia, the Carolinas, and Georgia made this every July and August when tomatoes came in faster than anyone could eat them. It was a way to celebrate the garden without turning on every burner. One pie fed a table. Tomato pie never crossed into the mainstream. It stayed where it started, in the kitchens of people who grew what they ate and ate what they grew. Today, it remains one of the most underappreciated dishes in the Southern canon, hiding in plain sight at church potlucks and family reunions where nobody thinks to write it down. Number 11, ashcake, cornmeal mixed with water and a little salt, shaped into a flat round, wrapped in dampened cabbage leaves or corn husks, and buried directly in the hot ashes of a wood fire. It baked from the radiant heat of the coals, and when it was pulled out and the leaves were peeled away, The surface had a faint char, and the inside was dense, steaming, and almost sweet from the slow cooking. Enslaved families made ashcake because they often had no oven, no skillet, and no time, only a fire and a handful of meal. After emancipation, the method carried on in rural black households well into the early 20th century, not because people lacked cookware, but because the taste was different from anything a pan could produce. The fire gave it something. When wood stoves replaced open hearths, ashcake had nowhere left to be made, and it quietly stopped. Number 10, Clabber biscuits. Clabber was raw milk left to sour and thicken at room temperature until it set into something between yogurt and soft cheese. Black families who kept cows or bought milk from a neighbor used Clabber in place of buttermilk to make biscuits that were tender, tangy, and rose high in the oven without any baking powder. The acid in the Clabber reacted with baking soda and did all the lifting. The biscuits had a flavor that store-bought buttermilk could not replicate, slightly funky, richer, and more complex. Making Clabber required no effort at all, just time and unpasteurized milk. A jar sat on the counter for a day or two and nature did the rest. When pasteurization became standard and raw milk moved out of daily life, Clabber disappeared from most kitchens. Without Clabber, the biscuits changed. They were still good, they were not the same. Number 9, Lane cake, created by Emma Rylander. Lane of Clayton, Alabama, in the 1890s, this is a layered white cake filled with a cooked mixture of egg yolks, sugar, butter, raisins, pecans, and a generous pour of bourbon. Black women across Alabama and Georgia adopted it and made it a fixture of holiday baking, church homecomings, and family reunions. The filling was the secret. It ripened over a day or two, and the bourbon soaked into the cake layers until the whole thing tasted like something between a fruitcake and a celebration. Lane cake is labor intensive. The filling has to be stirred constantly over low heat. The layers have to be baked one at a time, and the whole assembly takes most of a day. That labor is the reason it is disappearing. But the women who made it never called it labor. They called it Saturday before homecoming. Number 8, chicken pastry. In eastern North Carolina, this is not chicken pot pie, and it is not chicken and dumplings, though people from outside the region confuse it with both. Chicken pastry starts with a whole hen, boiled until the meat falls from the bone. The broth is rich and golden. Thin sheets of pastry dough, rolled out by hand and cut into strips or squares, are layered with the pulled chicken in a deep baking dish. The broth is poured over until it just reaches the top layer, and the whole thing is baked until the top pastry turns golden and the layers beneath go soft and silky, almost like a savory bread pudding. Black families in the coastal plain of North Carolina have made chicken pastry for generations. It appears at funerals, homecomings, and Thanksgiving tables alongside the turkey, and in some families, it outranks the turkey entirely. Every family has a version, and every family believes theirs is the right one. The pastry has to be thin enough to see through, or it is wrong. The chicken has to be a whole hen, not boneless breasts, or the broth will be weak, and the dish has to sit for 10 minutes after it comes out of the oven, or the layers will not set. There was no recipe card. The measurements lived in the hands of the woman rolling the dough, the way she felt the thickness between her fingers and knew when it was right. She did not time anything. She watched. She listened to the oven. She pulled it when the kitchen smelled a certain way. Chicken pastry does not travel well outside the families that make it because the recipe depends on feel, not measurement. When the women who made it by feel passed on, many families lost the dish entirely. Some are trying to bring it back now, working from memory, getting close, but never quite matching what their grandmother pulled from that oven. Number 7, bean pie. This one has a different origin than everything else on this list. Bean pie came out of the Nation of Islam, rooted in the dietary teachings of Elijah Muhammad, which encouraged Black Americans to replace the foods of enslavement with healthier alternatives. Navy beans were soaked, cooked, and pureed into a custard-like filling with sugar, butter, eggs, cinnamon, and nutmeg, then baked in a pie crust. It tastes remarkably like sweet potato pie. Bean pies were sold on street corners by members of the Nation of Islam in cities across the country, from Chicago to Harlem to Los Angeles. For decades, buying a bean pie was an act of community. Today, the tradition continues in some cities, but the corner vendors are fewer, and most Americans under 40 have never tasted one. Number 6, pepper jelly. Hot peppers from the garden, cooked down with sugar and vinegar into a jelly that glowed red or green in the jar. Black families in the Deep South poured it over a block of cream cheese and served it with crackers at every gathering, from baby showers to football Sundays. Making pepper jelly was a late summer ritual. The kitchen windows stayed open because the vinegar fumes could clear a room. A single batch produced enough jars to give as gifts through the holidays. It was sweet, fiery, and addictive. Pepper jelly has made a comeback at upscale cheese boards, but the original version, made in a home kitchen with garden peppers and a handed-down ratio, remains unmatched. Number 5, Blackberry jam cake, a dense, spiced layer cake made with blackberry jam stirred directly into the batter, giving it a deep purple crumb and a sweetness that tasted like the land it came from. Black families in Kentucky, Tennessee, and the mountain counties of Virginia and North Carolina baked this cake in late summer when the jam was fresh, or in winter using jars put up months before. The frosting was caramel, poured warm over the layers and left to set until it cracked when a fork touched it. Blackberry jam cake was a church homecoming standard, carried in on a plate covered with a clean dish towel. It required no exotic ingredients, just flour, eggs, buttermilk, spices, and a jar of jam someone in the family had made. When home canning declined, so did the cake. Store-bought jam never tasted the same, and the women who knew the difference stopped baking it rather than compromise. Number 4, meatloaf. Not the ketchup-glazed version from a 1950s cookbook. The Black Southern meatloaf was made with ground beef, sometimes mixed with ground pork, seasoned with onion, bell pepper, garlic, and a generous hand of Cajun seasoning or whatever spice blend lived in the cabinet. It was baked in a loaf pan with a tomato-based sauce on top that caramelized into something dark and tangy. Sliced cold the next day, it made sandwiches that held up in a paper bag. Meatloaf was a Friday night recipe in many Black households, fast to put together after a long work week, filling and forgiving. You could not really ruin it. That forgiveness is what made it perfect for a tired cook on a tight Friday. Number 3, brown stewed chicken. Chicken pieces, seasoned heavily, browned hard in a skillet until the skin crisped and darkened, then braised in a gravy built from the pan drippings with onions, garlic, tomato paste, and a splash of soy sauce or Worcestershire. The sauce clung to the chicken and turned everything in the pot a deep mahogany brown. Black families with Caribbean roots brought this recipe into Southern kitchens, and it merged with existing braising traditions already in place. It showed up at dinner tables across Florida, Georgia, and every city with a significant Caribbean American population. Brown stewed chicken is a bridge between two Black food traditions, and both claim it. That argument, loud and affectionate and never fully settled, is part of what makes the dish matter. Number 2, fried fish and spaghetti. In Memphis, this combination needs no explanation. Fried catfish or whiting served on top of a mound of spaghetti cooked in a sweet, tangy tomato sauce. It sounds like it should not work. It works. Black-owned fish houses across Memphis and later across the Mid-South served this plate for decades. The spaghetti was cooked soft, sauced heavy, and piled high. The fish sat on top, still crackling from the fryer. Together, they made a plate that was more than the sum of its parts. Fried fish and spaghetti is not in any cookbook. It lives in the community that made it, and it is still there today for anyone willing to look. Order it in Memphis, and nobody blinks. Order it anywhere else, and people stare. That gap tells the whole story of regional black food, beloved where it lives, invisible everywhere else. Number 1, stack cake. A cake built from thin layers of spiced molasses dough, stacked with dried apple, filling between each layer, then wrapped and left to sit for 2 to 3 days while the moisture from the apples softened the dry layers into something dense, fragrant, and unlike any cake most people have ever tasted. Black families in Appalachia and the Upper South made stack cakes for weddings, where each guest brought a layer, and the bride's popularity was measured by how tall the cake stood. The apples were dried in the fall and stored for months. The molasses came from local sorghum. Nothing was bought that could be grown or made. Stack cake is the recipe that best represents everything on this list. It took time, it took knowledge, it took community. It asked nothing of the grocery store and everything of the people who made it. That is the tradition. 25 recipes. Not one of them required a culinary degree. Not one of them required a specialty ingredient flown in from somewhere else. They required hands that knew what they were doing. A stove, a cast iron pan, and the kind of patience that comes from feeding people. You love on money that was never enough.
Creole ground beef and rice bake was the sort of meal your grandparents turned to when they wanted something bold, comforting, and steady enough to feed a full table without spending much at all. It always started with ground beef in a deep pan, blended with onions, celery, and green bell pepper, the holy trinity that shaped countless Southern and Gulf Coast suppers. As the vegetables softened, they melted into the meat, releasing a fragrance that wrapped through the kitchen like memory. Tomatoes, garlic, and a touch of hot sauce followed, giving the dish its quiet heat. The rice was cooked separately, then folded in so it could absorb the seasoned juices before everything baked together. Families loved this meal because it fed many and filled the house with a smell that made the day feel easier. Your grandparents seasoned it by instinct, adding a pinch more spice or a splash more sauce depending on who was coming to dinner. Creole ground beef and rice bake was comfort built from tradition and adapted through necessity, a dish that fed both body and memory.
Number 20, fried bologna sandwich on Wonder Bread. 2 slices of Oscar Mayer in a hot, dry skillet until the edges curled up and the middle puffed like a little dome. Mustard on 1 slice of Wonder, mayo on the other, and the fried bologna slapped between them while the bread was still cold. Saturday morning breakfast in 1,000 kitchens. The puffed dome had to be poked with a fork to flatten it back down before the sandwich would close. Some grandmothers added a single slice of American cheese. Some added a fried egg with the yolk broken on purpose. The sandwich was eaten standing up at the counter most of the time because Saturday morning had laundry and grocery shopping and a whole list of errands waiting on the other side of breakfast. By the way, real quick before we get to the next one, if everything you have heard so far is making you hungry for the kind of cooking that actually fed 3 generations on 1 paycheck, the cookbook we put together has the full versions of these dishes written down the way our grandmothers actually made them. The link is in the description below if you want to take a look. Now, back to the list.
Peach cobbler bubbled golden and fragrant from ovens across Black households on Christmas Day. Its fruit filling representing summer, preserved for winter. Canned peaches were layered with sugar, cinnamon, and butter, then topped with biscuit dough that rose into tender crust during baking. The cobbler emerged with caramelized edges where fruit juices had thickened and dough had crisped into buttery perfection. Mother served it warm, with cold cream poured over top or vanilla ice cream melting into golden pools. Canned peaches made dessert affordable year-round, their sweetness concentrated into something almost better than fresh. The cobbler assembled quickly between cooking tasks, baking while family gathered. Peach cobbler proved simple desserts made Christmas complete.
Okra and ground beef stew was one of the quiet staples your grandparents relied on during weeks when money was thin, but supper still needed to be hearty. The stew began with browning the ground beef, letting onions soften in its juices until they turned clear and fragrant. Then came the sliced okra, fresh from a garden, or traded from a neighbor who always had plenty. Okra thickened the stew as it cooked, turning the broth rich and velvety without needing anything extra. Tomatoes, peppers, and a bit of broth followed, creating a pot that smelled earthy and warm. Some families added corn or lima beans, others tossed in leftover vegetables that needed to be used. As the stew simmered, the flavors blended into something far deeper than the ingredients alone. Your grandparents ladled it into bowls with pride, knowing it was nourishing, comforting, and built to last. Okra and ground beef stew was a reminder of how families thrived through lean seasons with creativity and patience.
Number 24, Banquet Salisbury, steak TV dinner. 99 cents at the Save-A-Lot, 6 minutes in the microwave, and the foil tray steamed up the kitchen for 10 seconds when you peeled the plastic back. A brown disc of pressed beef and mushroom gravy, a square of mashed potatoes that came out gray, corn kernels in one corner, a brownie in the other, and the whole thing eaten in front of the little kitchen TV with the bent antenna. In a lot of black households in the 90s, the Banquet Salisbury was what dinner looked like on the nights Mama worked a double. It was not a celebration plate, it was a placeholder plate that did its job. The brownie was always the part you saved for last.
Cornbread dressing was the soul of Christmas dinner, its savory richness anchoring the entire holiday meal in African American homes. Mothers crumbled day-old cornbread into enormous bowls, mixing it with sautéed celery, onions, and sage that perfumed kitchens. Chicken broth moistened the mixture while beaten eggs bound everything together into perfect texture. Some families added giblets or crumbled sausage, depending on regional traditions and budget. The dressing baked until golden on top and custardy inside, its edges crisping into coveted portions. Unlike bread stuffing, cornbread dressing carried distinctly Southern heritage that Black families treasured. It stretched to feed crowds, since cornmeal cost pennies, and transformed into enough for the entire extended family.
Sweet pepper and beef smothered rice was a meal your grandparents made when they needed color, warmth, and comfort all in one pot without spending much. It began with ground beef browning in a sturdy skillet, releasing just enough fat to soften the onions and garlic. Then came the sweet peppers, sliced into strips that brightened both the pan and the mood. As they softened, their gentle sweetness blended into the savory beef. A pot of rice cooked quietly on the back burner, fluffy and ready to carry the meal. Once combined, each grain absorbed the seasoned juices and pepper flavor. Your grandparents seasoned it by feel, adding paprika, hot sauce, or broth depending on what the week allowed. Some versions added tomatoes, others kept things simple, but every variation carried the same warmth. Children scraped their plates clean because the dish was hearty without being heavy, and adults loved how far it stretched. Sweet pepper and beef smothered rice was a reminder that simple ingredients, handled with care, could make a supper feel complete.
Number 25, Sunday smothered chicken and rice. This is the smell that made the whole apartment building know what day it was. A whole cut-up fryer, bone in, browned in a heavy skillet until the skin went the color of pecan. The bird came out The flour went in and the roux turned slow under a wooden spoon. Onions and bell pepper followed, a little garlic if Grandma trusted you with the jar, and then chicken stock from the kettle that had been simmering on the back burner since service let out at noon. The chicken pieces went back in, the lid went on, and the smothering began. An hour, sometimes 90 minutes, while everyone changed out of their church clothes and the long grain rice came up to a boil in a separate pot. The gravy got thick enough to coat the back of a spoon. The kitchen windows fogged. The plastic on the good couch in the living room squeaked every time somebody walked past with a hungry look. The sound of a Sunday smothered chicken was a low and steady simmer that you could hear from the front door. The sound of the lid coming off was the sound that called everyone to the table. 2 scoops of rice, 2 pieces of chicken with the dark meat going to whoever had been the most polite that week, and a long pour of gravy over the whole plate. Cornbread on the side, sweet tea in the jelly jar glass, and a paper towel folded into a napkin because the cloth ones were saved for company. This was the meal that taught a whole generation what unhurried tasted like. The detail no one mentions is the second plate, the one wrapped in foil and put on the back of the stove for the family member who got off work at 6. It was always still warm when they walked in.
Hoppin John appeared on Christmas tables as both celebration and superstition. It's black-eyed peas promising prosperity in the coming year. Rice and peas were cooked together with smoky ham hock or bacon, the starches absorbing meat drippings until every bite carried depth. Onions and garlic added aromatic foundation, while cayenne provided warming heat. The dish connected families to Gullah Geechee traditions stretching back centuries, carrying cultural significance beyond its simple ingredients. Mothers started cooking on Christmas Eve, letting it rest overnight so flavors could deepen. The dish cost pennies since dried peas and rice were pantry staples, storing indefinitely. Eating Hoppin John at Christmas ensured good luck, a tradition families never skipped.
Cornbread-topped beef pie was the kind of dish that made an ordinary evening feel special, even when the ingredients were humble. Your grandparents started by browning the ground beef with onions and garlic until the mixture turned savory and fragrant. Vegetables followed, often whatever could be found in the pantry or pulled from the garden. The filling simmered into a warm, hearty base that could have stood on its own. But the cornbread batter poured over the top transformed it, baking into a golden crust that was tender on the bottom and crisp on the surface. The smell filled the house with a sense of abundance, even in hard times. Your grandparents cut generous squares, each serving carrying the perfect blend of sweet cornbread and savory beef. Cornbread-topped beef pie proved that simple ingredients, handled with care, could feel like a celebration.
Number 23, now and latest, from the corner store. A dime got you a long pink and yellow brick of cherry and banana that broke your back teeth before it softened up enough to chew. The corner store in the 90s had a glass counter at kid eye level, and that whole counter was candy. Now, and later's next to lemon heads, next to Boston baked beans, next to a tray of Mary Janes that had been there since the Reagan administration. After school, a quarter went a long way. 10 cents for the candy, 15 cents for a frozen Huggy in the back freezer, and the rest of the walk home was spent biting and chewing and trying to make a brick of cherry last the 8 blocks. Nobody's mother knew exactly what was in now and later. Nobody asked. The wrapper was the receipt, and the receipt was folded into the back pocket of jeans that came home from school every day with a sugary square in the corner.
Neck bones and rice stretched Christmas protein further than any other dish, feeding large families on the cheapest cuts available at butcher shops. Pork neck bones were browned until deeply caramelized, then braised slowly with onions, garlic, and bay leaves until meat fell from bone. The rich gravy formed during cooking was spooned generously over mounds of fluffy white rice, each grain soaking up smoky, savory goodness. Mothers made this when budgets stretched thin, but tables still needed to look full and festive for visiting relatives. Neck bones cost almost nothing at counters, where prosperous customers ignored them. The dish proved skilled cooks could transform overlooked ingredients into something everyone requested year after year.
Skillet hamburger hash with potatoes was the kind of meal your grandparents leaned on when the day had already taken every ounce of their energy, but the family still needed something warm and filling before bedtime. It always began with ground beef sizzling in a cast iron pan, releasing just enough fat to soften the onions that followed. Then came the diced potatoes, piled high at first, slowly sinking into the pan as the heat worked its way through them. Those potatoes were the real secret, stretching the meat further and soaking up every bit of seasoning until they tasted richer than they had any right to be. Your grandparents learned to flip the potatoes at just the right moment, leaving some edges crisp while letting the centers turn tender and soft. The smell alone brought kids drifting into the kitchen, hoping to snag a crispy piece before the spoon scraped it off the bottom. Sometimes a spoonful of broth was added, sometimes a splash of vinegar or a pinch of paprika, each variation shaped by whatever the pantry allowed that week. Nothing ever went to waste in meals like this. Every bite carried the feeling of care, of resourcefulness, of doing the best you could with what you had. A skillet like this made a house feel steady, even during the hardest years, and families remember those flavors long after the recipe faded from everyday cooking. It was simple food, but it carried a depth that came from generations learning how to make a little stretch a long way. Skillet hamburger hash was not just supper. It was a kind of quiet reassurance passed from one plate to the next.
Number 21, BBQ rib. Tips in a styrofoam box. The Chicago rib tip in the 90s was a whole genre, sold from walk-up windows with bulletproof glass and a turnstile of pre-folded boxes behind the counter. Tips with a cartilaginous end of the spare rib, the part butchers used to throw away, smoked over hickory in a converted oil drum until the fat rendered and the meat pulled clean. A $6.95 small order came with 2 slices of white bread, a scoop of slaw, and a flood of sauce that turned the bread red and then orange and then translucent at the corners. People ate them on the hood of the car in the parking lot while the smoke was still rising off the box. The bones got piled up on the dashboard because nobody wanted to put a greasy hand back on the steering wheel until the eating was done. Some of these dishes are still being made today. Some of them are hanging by a thread, kept alive by one grandmother in one kitchen in one town. Try the stack cake. Make a pot of pinto beans on Monday and let it simmer until the house smells right. Roll out a sweet potato butter roll and see what happens when you stop reaching for the marshmallow bag. Drop the one your family made in the comments. The recipe does not have to be on this list. It just has to be real.